big time shift in our main event of the evening. The Irish Dragon, Paul Felder, stepping in on short notice to take on RDA, Rafael dos Anjos, stepping in for Islam Makhachev. And Matt, the originally slated main event would have been a very interesting fight because you had Dos Anjos moving back down from 170 pounds to the division that he once ruled as the former lightweight champ. And I mean, Matt, I feel like we never really got to see the full extent of what Rafael dos Anjos could have done at 155 pounds. He became the champ, and then he had that fight against Eddie Alvarez, and he was no longer champ. We missed out on the fight with Conor McGregor, and it just left a legacy that kind of leaves you scratching your head. He fought a lot of the top competition at 155 pounds and 170 pounds, and he picked up big wins in both divisions. I mean, a lot of people like to point to the fight that he had in the main event back in UFC Winnipeg when he beat Robbie Lawler. Like, how crazy was that fight? Rafael dos Anjos is kind of like a tiny buzzsaw. Just so happens that he's either fighting out of Gracie Baja HQ or King's MMA or Ruka Sport. But he's been in Southern California for a very long time, training with a great stablemate of talent. And we look at the man on the left-hand side, Matt, that really saved this card. And I mean, kudos to Paul Felder. A, company man. B, when he's on his weeks off, he is one thick boy, and of course, that has to be a talking point. I know RDA is moving down from 70 back to 155 pounds. If you look at the pictures of Rafael dos Anjos over on the Instagram, dude, shred city. Dude's actually in very, very good shape. I hate using the word dude, but you look at Rafael dos Anjos, and he looks bricked up and ready for the transition down to 55. He said it as much over on the social medias. He was entertaining a fight at 70, so it'll be interesting to see where this fight slots in. I mean, hey, this fight was just announced. We already happened to be taping the breakdowns and finishing up on the things that we had from yesterday before the Makhachev fight was canceled. But this fight's an awesome one because you have two guys that are kind of in the later stages of their career. You have to say that. Paul Felder, 36 years of age. Same thing for Rafael dos Anjos. And Matt, the weird thing, and this is the narrative I want to take with this one, is the fact that Rafael dos Anjos was moving back down to 155 pounds to be taking on the number 12 ranked lightweight in Islam Makhachev. Now he gets the number 7 ranked Paul Felder. What's in it for Paul Felder to take a fight like this?
Because you don't become the BMF of the UFC by beating Nate Diaz in front of The Rock. You become the BMF of the UFC by fighting RDA on 5 days' notice, willing to cut who knows how much weight Paul Felder's going to have to cut, but still accepting the fact that he's going to fight RDA, the former champ, at 155 on 5 days' notice in a fight that's still going to be 5 rounds, which is really important because we've seen, as of late, especially during these pandemic times, the UFC's kind of just had to rush to put some main events together. Rakic, Alexander Smith was only a 3-round main event.
Anthony Smith,
sorry. Derek Brunson, Edmund Shabazian, another 3-round main event. So the UFC has made exceptions, recently, but Paul Felder's saying, no, like, main event, 25 minutes, let's go for it. Stylistically, this is such a fun fight too, but before we get into that, Islam Makhachev is by far the biggest loser out of all this, because let's say RDA comes down and he is able to beat Paul Felder. Well, Paul Felder's in that weird kind of purgatory, if you will, of his career, where is he an active fighter? Is he just doing the commentary stuff, kind of helping out at the gym? He's sort of, to me, in that James Krause category where it's, I'll fight when I want to fight, but Paul Felder has a little bit more of a name than James Krause, so I'm sure he's fishing for those bigger names. And I mean, this is it. Like, the fact that Paul Felder's doing this is just insane. I'm still kind of trying to get over that. But Islam, if RDA beats Paul Felder, who still has a number next to his name, he's going to be in that top 10 range. And I really doubt he's going to want to go backwards to fight Islam Makhachev that he was a 4-1 underdog against. So, and then if Paul Felder wins, well, he's already sort of and I hate to use this term, but I do think it applies. He's kind of a part-time fighter right now. So I really doubt he wants to fight a stylistic nightmare in Islam Makhachev just to be, on like the main card of a pay-per-view. So, unfortunate for Islam Makhachev, but I gotta be honest, this fight is going to be fireworks. I'm more excited for this fight than I was the RDA Islam Makhachev fight, because in that fight, you know what you're gonna get. You're gonna get Islam trying to take down RDA for the majority of it, and then if RDA, we kind of see, is the takedown defense better at 155 than it was at 170? You kind of hope so if you're a fan of his. We don't need to worry about any of that now. It's gonna be RDA in sort of that volume kind of firefight that we know that he's really capable in. And the thing that I'm excited for, we saw a lot of clinch work out of RDA in that Robbie Lawler fight, and Paul Felder not afraid to get bloody in the clinch, so I do think that this makes for a very violent and very entertaining main event.
And it's a lot better that we actually get a striker on the left-hand side, or a guy that's primarily known as a striker, because with Islam Makhachev, you have that ground game, you have that wrestling, and RDA, for the longest time, has struggled with the bigger guys, especially guys that are going for those volume and chain-heavy takedowns. With Paul Felder, you're not necessarily going to get that. And for Paul Felder, again, like you said, he's the type of guy that if we look at his recent record, we're talking one fight in 2020 against Dan Hooker. That was an absolute war. The fight against Edson Barboza at UFC 242 was as well. So that's back in August of 2019. Before that, a win over James Vick. Before that, in 2018, a fight against Mike Perry at 170 pounds. He loses that one by split decision, fighting with a broken arm partway through. And then before that, a stack of 3 wins. Alex Ricci, Stevie Ray, and Charles Oliveira. Matt, we happen to be in the building for the Alex Ricci win. That was kind of crazy back at UFC Halifax. But you look at that for Paul Felder, and I'm looking at the quality of the fights. The Charles Oliveira win's huge. That was before Oliveira went on this huge run that he's been on lately. The Mike Perry fight, a bit of a toss-up. Again, you move up to 170, you take the fight, you break your arm, you still have a competitive go. Yeah. James Vick, at the time, was a decent win. I still scratch my head a little bit on that one. No longer in the UFC. And the Barboza and Hooker wins the win against Barboza and the loss to Dan Hooker, those were toss-up fights. And for Paul Felder, again, to be ranked 7th in the division, little bit of a head-scratcher, and he's in a tough spot because it's not like Paul Felder's going to go in tomorrow and have a fight against Tony Ferguson, but you never know, right? It's not like he's going to have a fight against Ali Quinta, but you never know. Well, ultimately, apparently, he's been waiting on the sidelines, and he gets a shot at Rafael dos Anjos.
So, RDA, at this stage of his career, there is 2 different sides to him. We have seen a lot of the takedown defense out of RDA as of late, and it's not great. But that's because he's fighting Kamaru Usman, Colby Covington, Michael Chiesa, like primary grapplers. And I know Chiesa was a 155 and he moved up to 170, but I think we can all agree, physically, Michael Chiesa is a much bigger person than Rafael dos Anjos. And he was able to kind of employ the same game plan that those 2 previous wrestlers were against RDA. Make him tired. Just go for as many takedown attempts as possible, force him on the defense. The one thing I don't like from RDA, I feel like he's further into his golf game than Paul Felder is, even though Paul Felder realizes that he is kind of in that retired stage, if that makes any sense. Like Paul Felder, he's kind of setting himself up for what he's going to do after fighting. He realizes he doesn't have that many left. RDA still thinks that he can get to the title shot eventually, and the problem I have is his striking, I do think, has sort of regressed as of late. He used to be a really good pressure striker. He was always moving forward. We saw that a little bit in the Covington fight. I do think that was the last good RDA performance, even though he was on the losing end, because he did put up a really good fight against Colby Covington. I highly recommend you go back and watch that fight. Covington won the fight, don't get me wrong, but RDA took Covington down. He outstruck him for periods, and he did look good. But after that fight, we haven't really seen that same style of striking. If you can back Rafael dos Anjos up, he does get into a bit of a defensive shell. And if this is a Paul Felder, I'm going to say at 100%. I understand he's not going to be because he didn't have a camp. Who knows the toll that the weight cut's going to take? There are a lot of question marks. But let's say Paul Felder is as close to 100% as we can predict. If Paul Felder can back up RDA, he's going to be a nightmare for him. He checks leg kicks, something that RDA throws a lot of. And RDA used that to really good effect against Neil Magny, who... I'm going to compare this fight to that a lot because Neil Magny, another really good striker, super dangerous on the feet, I would say doesn't have the power Paul Felder or maybe some of the, crazier techniques with the elbows, but still a very accurate striker who has a high volume and high work rate. RDA just chopped his legs down, eventually took full mount, and then got him into a head and arm choke. The jiu-jitsu of RDA, if he is able to take Paul Felder down, and I'm assuming that's what his game plan is going to be, is kind of on another level, and that does worry me for Paul Felder. We saw Charles Oliveira, although he wasn't able to submit Paul Felder, he had him in some terrible positions throughout that fight. He had him in that Darce, it could have been Anaconda, and he almost had him tapped out, and he was able to get Paul Felder in a lot of compromising positions. Now, the good news is, Paul Felder did get out of all of those and ended up TKOing Oliveira on the ground, which is a very impressive feat, but RDA isn't going to have the same style where he's comfortable off of his back like Oliveira, where he's susceptible to being hit. If Paul Felder does get top control on RDA is constantly going to be trying to sweep and get on top himself, so I don't think it's going to allow Paul Felder a lot of time in top position to really posture up and land some of that great ground and pound, because Paul Felder, elbows are a real term, and I think he brings them to the octagon just as good as anyone. Stevie Ray, say what you want about him, but the TKO over him was extremely violent. Tie clinch into a knee and then a bunch of ground and pound elbows. that is kind of the bread and butter game of Paul Felder. And if RDA decides to just stand in front of him and try to make this into kind of a Muay Thai kickboxing fight, I think Paul Felder has a very good chance of winning. The issue, though, is I don't know where Paul Felder's takedown defense is without a full camp. I know with a full camp, if he's 100%, he's got kind of that Thiago Santos pre-ACL surgery takedown defense where he's really good at exploding and then getting out of the way. He can do that to good effect. But the fact that he hasn't had a lot of time to prepare for a guy like RDA, who is going to require you to have the best cardio of your career, because by round 5, if RDA is not getting taken down 1,000 times, he's going to be there. He's going to be throwing still a really high work rate. So as much as I want to side with Paul Felder in this fight, it's really hard to not pick the guy who's had a full camp and expected to fight this weekend.
And I mean, that's it. You look at Paul Felder, and again, you want to go through those wins. You look at the fight that he had, a fight of the night against Dan Hooker.
I thought he beat Dan Hooker.
That was in a main event. You're definitely not alone in that one.
I thought he lost Edson Barboza, though. That was the thing.
It was a split decision. So, I mean, yes, I thought that realistically Barboza won the fight against Felder. I thought that ultimately Hooker won the fight against Felder. But again, that one could go either way.
Very close fight.
James Vick fight, definitely a good one for him. You look at the fights that he's been taken down, though. He's been taken down by Hooker. He's been taken down by Barboza. You get taken down by Mike Perry. You get taken down by Oliveira. Francisco Trinaldo, Massaranduba, Josh Berkman. Love the beard, not so much the fights. Darren Cruikshank, Ross Pearson.
I don't think he
and Jason Sago, if we go all the way back to his fight in 2014. Yes, again, you can't really look too much into that. The other thing, too, with Paul Felder, he's continued to make advancements in his game to the point where he's the 7th-ranked lightweight in one of the most stacked divisions, though it's getting a little bit thinner. And, I mean, at this point, he continues to progress in Rufus Sport. I mean, that's such a good gym. We talk about Brendan Allen taking on this big fight against Sean Strickland. We talk about Gerald Mearshart being one of those leaders there. Forget about the Hamzat Chimaev fight. From a jiu-jitsu standpoint, he definitely stands firm. With Paul Felder, we continue to see bits and pieces added to his game. But the big thing with Paul Felder that he's known for, it's an intangible that's not going to jump off the page. It's one of those things that two nerds on the computer, it's easy for me to say this. The guy's toughness and his heart.
Oh my God.
And that's something that you can't quantify. You're not going to see it in any form of MMA math or analytics. Paul Felder is one of the toughest SOBs out there. Like, this guy comes to fight. For him to take this fight on short notice, for him to want it to be a 5-round main event, does not surprise me in the least.
BMF.
And I know, Matt, that you and I thought, well, maybe Beneil Dariush should get this opportunity. Yes, there was a bit of a, obviously, King's MMA thing with Dos Anjos. They probably didn't want to fight. We also threw out Drew Dober. And I know Dober was supposed to have a fight against Carlos Diego Ferreira on this date. Ferreira pulled out of that fight, but then threw his name into the hat of, yeah, I'll fight Dos Anjos. Why not? So there was a lot of people that it could have been. Ultimately, we get Paul Felder from Dos Anjos. Again, you're training for a 5-round fight that you knew was going to be a 5-round fight. You're Shred City coming down from 170 to 155. You've been putting in good rounds at Gracie Baja HQ. Again, the Kings connection, the Ruka Sport connection with everybody's old pal, Jason Perillo. Douche, douche! I'm really looking forward to this fight. Ultimately, if it was 100% both guys, it would be a really tough fight to try and figure out. Because for Dos Anjos, you have 20 more professional fights, and you still have the mindset of, I want to go out there and be a champion. What the hell is Paul Felder's mindset? I've already set myself up with a UFC commentating gig. I take 1 or 2 fights a year, and they're incredibly competitive.
If he wins this, though, he's an absolute legend.
I'm a huge company man. And I mean, hey, I'm eager to see, again, like you had mentioned, the line on this fight. Because originally, yes, Islam Makhachev was a very big favorite against Dos Anjos. Understandable. I mean, we hadn't even taped the pick. We were about halfway through, and then the fight fell out. So then we recorded an intro, and then that fell out. And then we recorded an intro today, and that doesn't matter anymore. So we are where we're at right now. If I had to guess, I would think that the odds are probably going to be close to par. I really do. I don't think it would be crazy if maybe Dos Anjos actually a little bit of a favorite, just ever so slightly, like minus 120, minus 125.
Like 2-1 RDA.
No. But ultimately, I think this is going to be a competitive fight until it gets like halfway through the second into the third. And then it's going to be overwhelmingly RDA.
It's going to be a lot of kind of Jorge Masvidal against Usman. You saw in the first round of their fight, Masvidal was able to explode, land some good combos, and you're like, hey, he might actually be able to win this. And then kind of as the fight progressed, there's a reason you have training camps. You don't just jump into fights for no reason, unless you're Kevin Holland, I guess, or Angela Hill. But Paul Felder, doing this on 5 days' notice, again, you can't say enough great things about the guy. Really high fight IQ, too. That goes along with defensively, he is really sound. He has a really high guard. He is going to be able to absorb and deflect a lot of the shots RDA gives him. It's just the wrestling and the grappling side of things. I do think with a full training camp, Paul Felder would be able to at least game plan a little bit and have a few different, sweeps and techniques to maybe give RDA some trouble on the ground. Unless he does crack him with a big shot or maybe catch him coming in trying to take him down, I don't see this for Paul Felder. It would be insane if he could go out there, just, Muay Thai clinch, elbow RDA, knock him out, and then retire. That'd be a great way to go out, but I really doubt it's going to happen. I'm going to side with RDA. It is a good fight to take, though, if you're Paul Felder, because RDA, at this stage of his career, there are a lot of question marks, and let's say his striking is to the point where he's so defensive that if you can start backing him up, you can start landing good combos. If Paul Felder is on his front foot and RDA is kind of backing up, eating shots, Paul Felder could TKO him. Like, he does have that kind of power. So it is a really volatile fight, if you will, because Paul Felder does have such a good chance to win with the crazy amount of power he has, but it's just hard to pick against RDA.
And I mean, if you look at Paul Felder, just maybe even one slight knock, the striking defense, 49%, you have a good enough sample size, strikes absorbed per minute, 3.4, and then you look at the takedown defense at 61%. He's not necessarily going for the takedowns, but he's susceptible to getting taken down. And I went through the list of the guys, and hey, that number's weighted a little bit by Jason Sago, Canada's own, Prince Edward Island's own Jason Sago. But again, with Paul Felder, he's liable to get hit. But if you hit him with 2 or 3 just pot shots, he's going to hit you with 1 or 2 really hard shots that you have to worry about. And there's a lot of straight shots up the middle. Matt, we've talked about that a lot recently, that Brian Ortega, you find that elbow up the middle, Paul Felder's a good guy to watch for a lot of those type of shots. Straight shots straight up the middle. Oh, yeah. He can throw the hooks as well. With Dos Anjos, if it's going to be a win for Dos Anjos, a lot of volume and a lot of pressure. And I really like what I've seen out of Dos Anjos as far as the social medias are concerned. I know you don't want to put too much stock into stuff like that. And if you look at Dos Anjos' strength of schedule, if we can really talk about it just quickly, you look at this guy's last 5 fights. Colby Covington, Kamaru Usman. Interim champ, full-time champ at welterweight. Kevin Lee, and he beat him by arm triangle in a fight that he looked amazing in that fight. Good. Loses to Leon Edwards, who was your number 3 ranked welterweight, and loses to Michael Chiesa, a blown-up lightweight who's found a lot of success at welterweight. None of those names are easy, including Kevin Lee. And then before that, you beat the former Strikeforce champion, Tarek Saffiedine. Tarek, where you at? He beat Neil Magny, and he beat Robbie Lawler, your former champ at 170. So, I mean, for Dos Anjos, we're taking on tough names. And even that Saffiedine fight, we're talking back over 3 years ago to this point. So, for Dos Anjos, I expect a win here. Again, the line probably maybe somewhere around par, maybe slightly favoring one of these guys. But ultimately, I'm really looking forward to this fight. It should be really competitive. Kudos to the company man, Paul Felder, for taking it. We're both going to side with Rafael dos Anjos in this one. Matt, now I'm really looking forward to this card. We've got a great main event. Brendan Allen is taking on a really tough test in Sean Strickland. There's great fights throughout, so make sure you check out the rest of the playlist for these videos. Keep locked in with Fight Night Picks. If fights fall out or if fights are added this week, you check in here, you hang out with us. Toss us up. Toss a like. See, I stutter to say it because I hate doing it, but we really appreciate everybody out there. This channel's grown a lot, just even in the past couple of weeks, so we really do appreciate everybody out there. Matt, as we always say, with Fight Night Picks, let's get into it.